So today we try to concentrate on the risk management aspect of a project. With our lengthy slide deck, but then we try to cover it up somehow today. um, so, uh, so managing risk is also a very important part. You as a project manager and even as a change manager who is looking after the project. Uh, so managing risk is a very important part of a project. Um, so um, just to set the stage, so any rewards, I mean, and there's any rewards to get obtained, there's a risk involved, and higher the risk, higher the rewards, and of course, uh, we could use any risk mitigation actions, so that the risk can be mitigated, or perhaps if possible, try to avoid the risks. So the question arises, what is risk? So risk is basically, yes, uh, is anything that actually for us as a project manager, uh, first thing we have to understand the risk, whether it applies to our project. So a risk somewhere down in another country, which is irrelevant for us as a project manager, might not be a risk to us. So for us, a risk is anything that can impact the achievement of the objective. So you as a project manager, your sole objective is to get the project, drive the project to a successful completion. And so any risk that is on your way, on your path, that anything that can affect and impact the on the achievement of your project objective could be considered as a risk. So, there are two key elements in risks. We will be discussing this in very much in detail in the coming sessions. Um, any risk, there is a probability of a risk happening, the likelihood of a risk happening, and then the other element of a risk is the impact, and the potential and the effect that it can have on your project schedule or project cost or the performance of the project. So the probability of a risk, how much likelihood that risk will occur, and the impact of that risk on the project objectives. Right. Then when it comes to management, so management is all about monitoring, planning and monitoring and controlling and taking some corrective action and again planning. So it's a cycle. So management in any terms is all about planning, taking corrective actions, and again monitoring, and again back to planning. So that cycle. So the so that is any management. So likewise, the risk management is actually is the objective of risk management is to reduce the harm of the risk. So risk management is actually managing your risks so that you can reduce the harm from your risks. And also it's actually a systematic approach of reducing the harmful risks, so that the project is less vulnerable for the project risks, and even your product is more robust by tackling the quality risks. So risk management is all about managing the risk so that you try to reduce the harmful effect of risk to your project. So in that terms, risk management is about responding proactively to positive and negative risks. We'll be talking about positive and negative risks in a short time. So risk management is about proactively responding proactively for positive and negative events that could occur, and increasing, if it is a positive risk, is positive risk, we talk about opportunities, positive risks. So if it is a positive risk, which is an opportunity, we talk about increasing the likelihood of a positive risk, and we try to increase the likelihood of the positive thing happening. And if it is a negative risk, of course we try to decrease the likelihood of it happening and decrease the likelihood of the impact, of the possible impact. Right. So as I told you, risk management is the management component of risk is assessing, is evaluating, managing and measuring, and again assess the risk, evaluate and see whether it's proper, and then manage the risk and measure and see whether your corrective actions have been effective. So this cycle is all about the risk management part in very simple terms. Right. So just to recap again, objective of the risk management is risk is uncertainty. Then again, it's not all the uncertainties in the world. The risk is uncertainty for a project that matters, that affects the project objectives. And primarily the project objectives we consider scope, schedule, and the cost, quality, performance, and those stuff, the prime factors of a project. And responding proactively for positive and negative events, and increasing the likelihood of the positive events and decreasing the likelihood and the impact of the negative event. Right. So in generally there are various type of risks, and you in your organization also you would have come across already. There are various kind of risks that is involved, and some of maybe pure operational risk, a factory manager or even running an organization. The operational risk, the operational the risk that is involved, such as if you're in IT, the capacity management, or change request, maintaining change request, employee issues, cost overruns. So those are the operational day-to-day risks. And then there can be financial risks that is involved, where majorly the finance department may be tackling it out. The interest rate risks or the exchange rate risks, the poor financial management, you are going on a loss, especially during a period like this. Accounting problems, even petty cash problems. Also, those can be some financial and operational risks. Then there can be some strategic risks for an organization, such as most strategically important, you are losing your market share, you are losing to your competitors, you are losing your customers. The risks of losing your customers, the pricing pressures, as of now, the cost pressures for you on a strategic level. And even if you are looking at a joint venture partner, if you have started a new factory with a joint venture, or a new business with a joint venture, the strategic risks that is associated with those partnering events. Or you can have a general, basically the outside the risks of the hazardous risk that is outside your organization that can affect you, like the COVID, the macroeconomic, what we are facing as an economy, the political risks, the legal risks, the terrorism risks that we faced a few years last year even. So those are the risks that might not be within much of your control, but then things to know, so that you can take preventive and corrective actions, proactive actions, once you know the risks. So there can be, these are not the only 4 types of risks. So there can be n number of risks which you can, in an organization, that you can categorize. So it depends on how you categorize, but then generally, to understand the concepts of risk, these are some of the type of risks that you can come across in an organization. Right. So basically, we will be discussing this in detail, but then uh, basically what we try to do is we try to graph out. We come up in a short time how we do this, but then we try to graph out graphically the impact and the probability. And so the entire crux of risk management is actually try to get this diagram out, and try to get this grid out. So here this will give you a very clear picture of risk of your organization. Now we are talking about projects, but then even your organization uh, will have. So here such a grid will give you a clear indication of what are the high level risks and what are the low level risks are there. So if you can see, even this technological innovation, the brand risk, there's risk associated with the brand, and even catastrophic risk, even sometimes your leadership will be a risk if there is no succession planning properly in your organization. After the leadership moves on to another organization, there is nobody to take over. There can be leadership risks, there can be regulation risks. So so this is actually one of our primary objectives. When you go down today on the slide deck, you will understand is to map out this grid, the impact and the probability, and map out your risks, so that we will have a very clear picture as a project manager what are the risks that is affecting your project. Right. So a few concepts to go on with it. We have done this in our previous when we were discussing the schedule management and even the cost management. We discussed this, the known risks, the risks that you might be aware that is coming up, and such as the environmental certificates that you need to take, risk of not obtaining that environmental certificate, or risk of obtaining a legal approval. So those risks that has been identified, basically the known risks. And in our previous sessions we discussed about a contingency reserve, so that we keep a contingency reserve, a known figure, known percentage, a contingency reserve. Maybe at each activity level of the WBS we kept an contingency reserve. Maybe at the cost level, at each activity level we keep a contingency reserve. So to capture any risks that is involved, so that a cost escalation or a time escalation because of a risk, so we try to accommodate that into the project plan. And also we discussed about the unknown risks in our previous sessions. So unknown risk unknown, totally, that you are not aware. I mean, like this COVID or any terrorist attack that you are not aware. So in such instance we keep a management reserve on top of all the contingency reserve. We keep up a management reserve to have a buffer, so that if such instance occur, that this is the cost margin that we are keeping, and this is the time schedule reserve that we are keeping. So if you can remember in our previous discussions, contingency reserve, this reserve is measured either in cost and time, and management reserve is not a part of the cost baseline, or even the schedule baseline when it comes to schedule. And contingent reserve is identified because your contingent reserve is for risks that you have already identified. And since you have identified your risk, we're discussing this in a short time, we can use mathematical techniques to identify the degree of the risk and the monetary value of that risk involved. And when it comes to contingency reserve, it is under the full authority of the project manager, because it includes in the cost baseline. So the contingency reserve, the project manager has full authority to use it. When it comes to management reserve, is an overall figure, I mean total figure that we can keep on a project, and might not be 100% mathematically we should be able to calculate, but then it's a gut feeling figure that we can keep basically. And then it's not under project manager's permission. So if you are touching the project the management research, then of course you will have to go to a PMO or any higher authority to access it. And so if you can remember, this is true for schedule and even the cost. So we did activity estimates, and then we plug up a contingency reserves, and then we come up with the cost baseline or the time baseline, schedule baseline, and then we plug up the management reserves on top of that, and then we come to the cost budget or the full time estimate of the project. Right. So then as another concept, individual versus overall risks. So at each element of the WBS, or each activity that we have split it out at the WBS level, we might be able to find a risk element there. So the entire project risk, the concept is that the whole project risk might be should be greater than the summation of individual risk, because it's a holistic effect that we are talking about, the interdependencies of risks and other dependencies of known and unknown risk. So the entire overall project risk might be greater than the sum of the individual risks involved, since since it includes all sources of since the project risk includes all sources of uncertainty, including the known uncertainties and also the unknown uncertainties. So the overall risk represent the full exposure of stakeholders to the implication and the variation in the project outcome. So in very simple terms, basically what I'm trying to emphasize is the overall risk of a project is obviously greater than the sum of the individual risks. Right. Then we go in deeper dive into risks. There's something called the risk attitude. As we discussed in earlier, when we discussed the change management concepts, the pro-side change management concepts, they are the main thing that the main assumption is that organizations are driven by each individual, and organization decisions are taken by individuals, and change is at individual level. So similar thinking here, people drives organizations, and the identification of risks and identification of the probability of happening that risks, and identification of the magnitude, the impact of the risk, everything is performed by people. So all elements of risk process are performed and individuals or by people, end of the day. And then the risk attitude of a person is state of mind. It's a mental judgment, because there is no concrete judgment. There can be techniques, but then there can be mathematical techniques for known risks, but then it's end of the risk is a very judgmental call, and risk attitude is actually that judgmental call is actually given by individual persons in your organization. So the risk attitude is actually a state of mind, and it's a mental view of the risk. So it depends from person to person. So it drives, it's driven by perception, and and the risk attitude actually depends from person to person. Right. So risk attitude is actually more individualistic driven, and it depends on you basically. And we find in an organization there are people who are risk averse, people who do not want to take risky decisions, who are laid back, and who do not want to get involved in risky decision making process. And where we find people, especially the younger generation people, who are more risk seeking in an organization and who actively seek risk. And maybe your CEO should be a risk seeker. If your CEO is a risk averse person, then of course the risk averseness trickles down to the bottom line of the organization. I mean, to the down to earth of the organization. If your CEO is a risk seeking CEO, who like to take a risk, obviously calculated risk, we'll talk about in a few minutes, in decision making, then your organization is a more performing and more innovative organization. So it's all depends on person. So risk attitude is actually, it's on the individual. It's how you see your risk. And in society we find risk averse persons and risk seeking persons, right? So since organizations are built with individuals, and if your organizations are built up with risk averse persons like government institutions, where even the head of a government institution do not want to take any risk in their decision making due to various things, because he has a pension in his hand, and this and that, and because of legal restrictions, so he doesn't want to take risks. So naturally the government institutions are very much risk averse. Whereas if you go on a more private oriented organization, and which are more risk seeking, especially the venture capitalistic, who invest on small booming tech companies, like Hatch, and who invest. There are people who invest on small companies for more innovative ideas like Pick Me, or who eventually invest on them. So those are, because they are top management risk seeking, the entrepreneurs are risk seeking, the investors are risk seeking. So those are more innovative driven organizations, and whereas more into government organizations are more risk averse organizations. Again, this categorization is purely due to people working in the organization. So there can be government organization who are risk seeking, very unlikely to find out, but it's end of the day, it's people. It's people can move from this state to this state. Right. So how much for you as a person risk is it in you, and how much of risk taking person are you, and is your risk averse person, and is your risk taking person. You when your CEO says something, do you jump, whether even there's a risk involved, you take the challenge in. So each individual person has a risk, as an element of risk attitude built into it. So that's why basically the risk attitude is actually directly linked with your gender, because it's so person centric, the risk attitude. Whether you're a risk averse person or a risk seeking person, it's more person centric characteristic. So it depends on your age, your culture, your family background, whether you have done sports, whether you have done rugby. So that's why even that's why people recruit, when you come to organizations, that people would try to recruit persons who have done sports or risk taking sports, especially like rugby. So that those are risk, naturally they are built up, the risk attitudes has been built up for risk seeking. For example, if you are recruiting an older person, then of course you can if you are recruiting an older person, then of course you can expect him to be a more risk averse person. Maybe gender wise, maybe females are more risk averse when it comes to Sri Lankan culture. Maybe the culture, your family background, you come up with a family which is a more refined family, and a more traditional background of family, then of course you're into more risk averse. If your passion is for traveling, if your passion is to exploring, or going on trips and jumping on mountains or climbing mountains, then you're more a risk seeking person. And so risk attitude is very much a person-centric characteristic, and taking that taking that final call, even if you have a risk-seeking attitude, taking that final call of taking the risk, the desire, I mean, when the final call of taking that risk, maybe depending on I mean your competence levels or your calculation, the risk that you calculated, it may be taking your aspiration levels. Maybe you want to become a multimillionaire businessman, so you have a risk attitude with you, and you finally take that call of starting a business because of your aspirations and your outcome framing. So it is a more situation characteristic that you trigger the risk taking part, but then the risk attitude is more person centered, right? So as I told you earlier, risk and reward has a now this is another dimension. So risk and reward has a direct relationship, high the risk, high the reward. And so so if your reward is here, if whatever it is, your reward is here, if you're a risk averse person, you can expect your rewards to be not much great. I mean, it's a flattened reward. If you're a risk neutral person, more the risks that you take, more the rewards will go on. And if you're a very risk seeking person, and you will get a potential higher exponential if you're risk taking, like entrepreneurs or young entrepreneurs who are starting businesses. So it's a very risk, and then but potential to go on exponential return, right? Then we try to understand, which is important to us in projects also, the concept, the relationship between the risk appetite, the risk tolerance, and the risk schedule. Risk threshold. So risk appetite is the it's directly coming from the risk attitude. It's the amount of risk that you are going to willing to take. It's as a person or as a project group or as an organization with your CEO, how much of risk that you are going to take. It's actually a direct summation of the risk attitudes of the people underlying with it. So risk appetite is the amount of risk that you are trying to take, and acceptable is basically the acceptable level risk to your organization or to your person, as you as a person. Now although you're a very risk seeking person, maybe that you don't want to get out from your job instantly and start a business. So how much of level of acceptable risk that you're going to take, although you are a risk seeking person. And the risk tolerance level is actually the range of risk. I mean, I am going to tolerate this amount of risk. This is the range of risk that I am going to tolerate, and this is the tolerance level of the risk. And the risk threshold is the upper limit of beyond which you are not willing to take a risk. So in your, even if your personal life, beyond that you are not willing to take a risk. Within this margin you are playing the risk. Say I mean, stock market is investing on shares is anyway a risk. So because there is no guarantee that you will get the initial amount of funding that you put. So you're willing to take that risk, is a risk appetite, and invest on the stock market, and you're going to put up between 5 lakhs to 1 million. That is the acceptable risk variance that you're going to put. So you're willing to burn your money from 500,000 to 1 million, and beyond that the threshold is after 1 million that you're not going to put any more money on that. So risk appetite is that yes we take high risks. Yes, as a project or as an organization we take high risks, and we can take risk up to 100,000, the risk tolerance limit. And the risk threshold limit is basically we cannot take risk beyond, your organization will decide we cannot take risk beyond this amount of money. So this So once again, so the tolerance limit and the beyond this limit, we are not taking any risks. So risk appetite is the acceptable level risk that you are willing to play with. So so this is the exact what's replica of what's happening in your organization. So your CEO and the board of directors has a risk appetite. I mean, so it depends. That risk appetite has a level of risk that they are willing to take. In a government organization, that is very low. That is more into risk averse side. And then your board and the CEO has a risk tolerance. Actually, at board level, they have a policy documents to state that this is the risk tolerance limits. So there are I mean, even in board approvals or the risk that they take, this is the maximum this is the tolerance limit that they will take. And then from there onwards it boils down to the C-suite, the risk limits, and your business heads, the risk limits. So even it's not risk, but then just for example, even your approval levels, the board can approve up to 10 million or something like that. Then your C level can approve to this amount. Then you as a head level can approve to this amount. So it's again it's a invariably it's a method of tackling your risks. So the risk exposure you give to your BU heads on expenses is 100,000, and as the suit at the C level, you can spend up to 1 million, and at the board level you can spend up to 10 million, so something like that. So so the risk tolerance statements and the risk limits will trickle down from that, right? So as we said, risk can be negative and risk can be positive. Negatives are threats, issues, cybersecurity threats, or whatever the threats that is there. Those are the negative risks that is there. And financial threats or strategic threats that is there. Positive risks are opportunities that is straight ahead, and positive risks can be new markets opening, or new investments that can be explored up, that can be there. So you're into a project, in the project of launching a product to a new market or a new country, so there can be loads of positive risks that you can explore, and also there can be loads of negative risks that can backfire to your project also. So coming back from the theory part of risks, back to the project management scope. So in project management, also in PMBOK, basically they defined several steps of risk management, and from planning to identifying the risks and quantifying, have a qualitative risk analysis. As I told you, is more into qualitative aspects, and if it is a known risk, how the quantitative risk can be analyzed, and plan your risk actions, and then how you respond to your risks are the executing part, and the monitoring and the control part of it. So let's look deep dive into these things in detail.